friends. Welcome to Sky House Herbs podcast. I'm Ashley Ellenboss, a clinical herbalist, and in this space, I share my knowledge and experience with plant medicine to help you on your own journey of healing and transformation. Join me in exploring the ancient wisdom of plant spirit medicine and how it can be used to heal the body, mind, and spirit. We'll talk to experts in the field and share stories from people who've been transformed by powerful plant allies. New episodes are released each Monday, so please subscribe. And now, let's explore this mystical world of plant medicine together. Hey everyone, welcome in. Today we'll be talking about the spiritual life of an herbalist. And I'm excited to share with you a little bit about my spiritual journey. And my hope in this video is that if you are looking to incorporate more spiritual practices and spirituality into your own life, that maybe this video will give you some ideas, some inspiration, maybe some things you don't want to do, which is totally okay. And again, I always love to create conversations and to create spaces where ideas can start to form and germinate. So I do hope today's talk will do all of that. Before I dive into today's topic, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please click the button. It helps other people to find me like you. And also like the video if you find it to be helpful. Share it with a friend if you think someone you know would find it interesting. So let's start by what is a spiritual life? Because I think that we have to kind of define what is spirituality, what is a spiritual life before we can talk about what it is. And I do want to say that, obviously the spiritual life of an herbalist, I'm talking about mine, I'm not talking about all herbalists. However, I would not be surprised if a lot of herbalists were similar in the way that they embodied these spiritual principles. But I don't in any way want to be speaking for all the herbalists out there saying this is how, if you're an herbalist, this is how you view spirit. No, none of that. None of that at all. Okay. So my life of a spiritual definition is one that is guided by something larger than myself. So I have had so many experiences in my life that have shown me that I am not in control. I'm just not. I'm not in control. And there is some intelligence greater than myself who is orchestrating all of this in some miraculous way. And I don't pretend to understand it, know it. I can't quantify or qualify it, but I have known since I was little that that is real and that is there. And so my spiritual life is really founded on this idea that God is relational. And you don't have to use the word God. I know for some people, like I was raised Catholic. So for me, the word God was very highly triggering for a very long time because I did not have a good experience in the Catholic Church. I was blamed, or I was, when I was in, I think, first grade, I went to a Catholic school and the nun accused me of stealing from one of the kids' desks. And I did not steal that eraser, but I was like sent to the office and there was like this whole disciplinary thing. I had to do all these Hail Marys and Our Fathers, and I didn't even do it. Like, I don't know what happened, but I remember going to CCD, or like the Catholic Sunday school, and I remember asking questions and being told to be quiet and listen and not to ask questions. And like my questions, I think, were pretty reasonable, which is like, how is Jesus the only son of God? Like, why would God only make one? Like, why? That doesn't make sense. Like, could there have been others? Like, will there be more? And that was not appreciated. And also, yeah, I had a lot of questions because to me, a lot of the dogma didn't make sense for me as a child. So I, pretty much was raised Catholic until I was about 13. And then my mom said, okay, you can choose whether to continue or to stop. And I said, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. But the idea of a spiritual life never left. I mean, that has been with me since I was a child. I love to play in the woods, outside, taking care of trees. Anytime there was a baby bird or animal that was injured, I would just, scoop it up and try to tend it or take it, find a place where it could be taken care of. And, I've always had this love of nature, this love of of souls and spirits. So that is something that has always been a part of my deep knowing about life. So to me, this idea of something bigger than myself, it used to be this very like in yoga, because I studied yoga from age 18 till now. So gosh, how old am I? I'm 45. So long time. I've been um studying yoga and practicing yoga for a long time. So to me, when I first started in yoga and started studying the more physical spiritual practices of taking care of your body and moving prana and chi and life force, to me, the word God still didn't feel right. I liked prana. I was like, I can get down with an energy field, but the idea that it's something personal, that doesn't feel right to me. So I really rejected the idea of a personal God for 20 years. And then I found my way to Bhakti yoga, which is a devotional yoga practice. And in Bhakti yoga, God is a person that is relatable and relational. And that really changed my mind because, it's interesting to me. I remember talking to one of my teachers, Hari Kirtana Das, who has some great books out there on Bhakti yoga if you're interested, and yoga philosophy in general. I'll include some links to Hari's books, but he was one of my teachers. And I just remember saying to him, because he was talking about how everything is a soul in a body. And like, dogs are, a soul in a body. And I was like, well, what about plants? He's like, oh, yeah. In the yoga tradition, in the ancient scriptures, yeah, they are souls in plant bodies. So, they're just as um, worthy and able to achieve states of enlightenment as, obviously in the yoga tradition, humans are like the highest, which, I get it. We've got a different level of consciousness than plants. But my point was, I remember when Hari said, oh, yeah, plants are persons or souls and plant bodies. I was like, hallelujah, I found it. And so, in that way, suddenly I was like, okay, well, we've got all these souls in all of these different bodies and forms. And we have not only this spiritual energy that pervades all of life, which feels very safe, but also if I can relate soul to soul with a plant, and if I can relate soul to soul with a person like my child or, one of my teachers, then why couldn't I relate soul to, huge soul with God? Like, why couldn't God be a friend too? And so in Bhakti Yoga, I started really opening my mind to this idea that God could be my friend and that I could have a conversation with God, just like I do with the plants, just like I do with my dogs, right? Like there's all these ways we can communicate. And why would God be any different? If God can do anything and everything, if God is all things, why could he not also have a person or soul form that could communicate with us? So I was like, yeah, well, I guess if God can do anything, then that's something that God could do too. And so, so that really opened my mind to this idea of a relational God. And let me tell you why that I think that's important for me as an herbalist, not only because of seeing the idea of, or the idea of having plants as souls, but this idea that there can be a reciprocation, that it's not just a one-way street. It's not like God is out there and I'm just living my life and it doesn't make a difference, and that God can find no delight in my little garden. Why not? Why could I not why could God not love my little garden? Why could God not look down at me and say, you taught that child how to identify plantain very well, right? Why could there not be this reciprocal way that I can relate to this great power? And that has been such a comfort for me over the last, I would say, like 5 or 6 years. For me, a spiritual life is dynamic. It's constantly changing. And to me, a spiritual life is a life that is always deepening in its meaning, and it's always expanding in its knowledge of itself or its consciousness. So to me, I consider myself a very highly spiritual person. Now, I'm not religious. I do think you can be spiritual and not necessarily have one religion. And I think you can be spiritual and enjoy a lot of different parts of different religions. Like I really do believe, like, I think Jesus is super cool. I love Jesus. I grew up on Jesus, so like I've got Jesus in my pocket. I've got the Buddha in my pocket. I've got, like Allah, Ekankar, Krishna. There's so many different Shiva. I mean, there's like endless manifestations of God or of God's energy. Why not befriend them all? To me, that makes sense. So while I don't couch myself in one religion, I am a friend of all religions. I want, like, to me, all of them are beautiful and make sense. So let's talk about spiritual life, because I think in my experience, going from Catholic upbringing, the next step actually between my Catholic upbringing and yoga were psychedelics. Like, that was my bridge. So it's, when I grew up in the suburbs, no, I didn't grow up in the woods. I wasn't frolicking through fields with baskets and aprons. No, no, I was in the suburbs of Columbia, Maryland. And, I grew up with paths and streets and on bikes and, like all of that. And when I started getting older, when I got into high school, I knew there was more out there than what culture society was giving me. I knew that there was more knowledge and wisdom out there. And my aunt had taken me to a yoga class when I was 12. And that really, I think that was part of what really started turning that part of my consciousness on to seek um, more spiritual ways of experiencing life. And then I started taking psychedelics. I started with LSD, which was like, hey, like, why not just throw yourself into the deep end? So I started using LSD when I was like 14, and then then I think I did mushrooms when I was like 16. And then I tried all sorts of different things between 16 and 21. Um, Never like super hard drugs, but a lot of like ecstasy and mind altering things. So, I'm not saying you have to do that. Like, you can bypass that. Like, if you don't need psychedelics to get to spiritual, like, this is just my journey. I'm not saying that they're not for everyone. So, especially if you're a kid, stay away. But I do want to say that it was, for me, it opened up my perception to a space where I knew what I was looking for. And so I started going to the library and read, like at 16, I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I was just like reading Terence McKenna and Krishnamurti. I was just like, I would spend hours voraciously reading spiritual texts from all over the world. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what I've been looking for. Thank goodness I started reading poetry and writing poetry. And that really started expanding my knowledge and my understanding of what the world is. Like, oh yeah, there's a lot of people who figured out what's going on, and there's a great intelligence that's so wise, so loving, um, out there, and you're not apart from it. And that was so comforting for me because I felt so alone as a teenager in a very suburban school where there were not a lot of people asking the questions I was asking. So fast forward, I started practicing yoga at 18. When I graduated from high school, I moved to Asheville, North Carolina. I started practicing yoga, meditation, pranayama techniques, and that really started also deepening, I would say, my physical ability to be a spiritual person. And this is something that's, I think, super important for me as an herbalist, is that I don't separate the spiritual from the physical. In my experience and my understanding, and a lot of spiritual traditions also agree, that the spiritual and the physical are like commingled. They're like part of the same web. And so we don't have to shame the body. We don't have to transcend the body. Um, but we have to be good in the body and kind and loving and peaceful and empathetic and caring and loving in the body, and in the world with all of the things that were also created by this great, a magnificent force. And for me, that was really important because I developed an eating disorder in high school. And so for me, the body was like, nope, it's got to be skinny. It's got to be perfect. Otherwise, like, it's bad. It's ugly. It's dirty. It's whatever. So when I found yoga and started feeling actual pleasure in my body and started enjoying what my body could do and realizing that my body wasn't just the physical, but it was energetic and it was spiritual too, it was like all of the pieces started fitting together. And, I didn't have to go through treatment with my eating disorder. I just practiced more yoga. And the more yoga I practiced, the less my mind obsessed about food and what my body looked like. And so it was over the course of, I think, like 2 years that very gradually the eating disorder, it just kind of like, it just left my consciousness. I just was able to set it down and be in my body in a way that was very peaceful and very loving. That's not to say that, like after having babies, things didn't creep up, but that initial, I want to call it almost like a spirit, like that inhabits you. It was almost like a spirit possession, this thing called, body dysmorphia. But once that spirit left, it was like the echoes were so faint. It never came fully back. And I think that's because I had practices. I had daily yoga, physical, moving my body, moving my prana, moving my breath. I had daily meditation. I had a community of people that also were doing spiritual work, who were taking care of their bodies, who were doing service work in the community. And so my whole life just started looking more like a spiritual life. And then when I opened up our yoga studio with my husband, um, and it was donation based. It was just like everything was like a continuation of what I was learning about what life is and what we're here to do. And that brings me to the next point, which is that to me, living a spiritual life is about living with a higher good and not a higher purpose. And my husband and I talk about this a lot. And if you listen to his podcast or his work on YouTube at Nightlight Astrology, you'll hear him talk about this a lot. But the idea that, like, this weird idea that we have in the West, that we all have a purpose, that we're all here to do one thing. And if we don't do that one thing, our life is ruined or it's worth nothing. And to me, a spiritual life is a life without it's like without one purpose. Like, I don't have a purpose. I don't know why I'm here, but I do know that I'm here to do things that are good for the planet, that are kind, that are loving. And when I say good, like, I understand, like, I'm not the judge of what is good and bad, but I just mean, like, in general, better than things that hurt people, right? So to me, let's scratch the idea of there's a purpose that you only and only you have. But instead, let's, to me, living a spiritual life is asking ourselves the question in every moment that we're choosing something. Is this a good choice? Is this a kind choice? Is this a loving choice? Is this choice going to get me closer to where I want to be? Is this choice going to help someone else get closer to where they want to be? And when we live in that way, our life has direction, but not purpose. Like the direction is, I want to be as open to God as possible. And I'm going to do my best at every turn in the road to stay open to the guidance that I receive. And I receive all sorts of interesting guidance. Sometimes the guidance is, oh, you're going to get COVID when you really wanted to go to an event and you're going to have to rest for 4 days. And I say, thanks, God. Didn't want that, but I know that you're giving this to me because I do need to rest. And during my resting time, I journal and I came up with the idea of some of my apprenticeship themes. So in every moment, it's like, what am I being taught? What am I being led to do? Not what am I going to willfully create? Like, I'm not here to manifest anything. I I don't think that's how it works. But I think there is a cooperative force that you partner with when you lead a spiritual life, because you just like there's a constant checking in, like, okay, you led me to do this thing, so now I'm teaching at this nursery school. Okay, like um so now I'm teaching herbs at a nursery school. Now what? Now what do you want me to do? Oh, okay. So now they're asking if I could teach the parents. Oh, okay. So that's the next thing. Okay, yes, I'll do that. And then there's also times where I have to say no because I just don't have time in my schedule. Oh, that sounds interesting, but my gut is telling me no. It's telling me my energy's maxed out. So it's like not just taking a yes attitude, but also being discerning, because you're the only one who can make the choice of how you use and how you protect your own vital force. So that leads me to the next piece, which is the vitalist framework. And I don't know, maybe some of you have heard of this before, maybe you haven't, but there is a long tradition in herbal medicine of vitalism. And this starts really, really far back, as you know, even further back than Hippocrates. So I think the Asclepius school and the what is the other one? Um, the Hygiena, or the it's like hygiene, the Hygeia and Asclepius schools of medicine. And Asclepius school was more reductionistic, like, okay, let's do surgery, let's get in there and fix things. It's more mechanistic. Whereas the Hygean model of medicine, which is there's this vital force inside of every person. And if we give the body the very basics, it will heal itself. And the very basics are healthy, clean food, clean water, good, clean air, sunlight, and exercise, and care or community or love or social support. If you have those, then your body will, the natural force, this vital force in the body, will heal you. And no, I don't like, there are certain times like cancers or broken bones where it's like, okay, all the sunshine's not going to heal the broken bone. You got to go in and get the bone set. But I think a lot of the time we rush too quick to fix things, then we allow time for the vital force to actually create the healing itself. And so for me as an herbalist, because that's like the tradition I hang my coat on, or I hang my nameplate on, is like I'm a vitalist. So for me, the idea of do no harm, which is from Hippocrates, but who was a vitalist, is really important, because this idea of do no harm and choose medicines that are gentle first and use lower doses and nudge the body back to health, all of those are based in my belief that there is some organizing force that is moving everything along, and that there is a great organizing force that is good, that wants us to heal. And so if, for me, each of us has this spark of the vital force given to us by something greater. And so therefore, as an herbalist, it's easy for me to practice a more spiritual path, because I like, it's not like, oh, maybe there's a vital force. It's like, no, I in my bones, in my soul of souls, have lived with a vital force in many other bodies. And I know this vital force is here now, and it's in that person, it's in that plant, that sick plant. Yes, it needs better compost. It needs more light, right? Like if I can pay attention, I can see the conditions that are causing that plant to be ill, and then I can help it. So I can help create the conditions by which its own vital force can bring it to healing. Okay, so that's really important to me. And if you're interested in learning more about vitalism, I don't have the book on my desk, but Matthew Wood wrote a wonderful book called Vitalism, and I'll include a link. So a few other things that I think are really important about that are part of my spiritual life as an herbalist is that before I come on to YouTube or whatever podcast you're listening, before I record this video like today, I always say a prayer, and I have a very specific prayer that I've been using for years, and you know it's mine. So you can find one that works for you, but I found one that works for me. And I say that prayer every time before I record or teach. Even if I'm teaching at a live workshop, like at a plant nursery, I take a moment and I say the prayer silently, because to me, what I'm doing in that moment is I'm saying, like, God, I'm yours. I'm open. Like, please guide me. Help me not to be a fool. Help me not to be egoic. Help me to like say things that are going to be actually helpful and, guide me in the way that I perceive and the way that I adapt what I say to who's here so that it is of most good. It is of most help. So that's one thing that I do, and that's directly related to my spiritual life. Another one is at the end of every day, our family says gratitudes. So each of us, we sit, we light a candle, and we say one thing we're grateful for, one thing we need help with, and one thing we love about ourselves. And I love this practice. It's so deeply supportive, nourishing, and affirming. And I think not only for me, it's also good as a family because I get to hear what my girls are grateful for, what they're struggling with and want help with, and I get to hear what they love about themselves. And then as a parent, I can support them. And then they get to also see me reflecting on my day. And I just think that's a really great family practice. And it's also a spiritual practice because really ultimately we're saying this in the container of God's ear. And then the last few points I'll make about living a spiritual life for me as an herbalist is that I am aware that my life is impermanent. And I think that's been it's hard. It's hard to acknowledge that we're going to die and that things are going to die and things are going to change. Like I remember when we opened our yoga studio, I thought we'll always have Sky House. This will always be a thing. This will always be part of my life. My kids will grow up and it'll be like this. And then you know what? In a moment of clarity, it wasn't. And I had to let it go. And I learned so much from the letting go. I've learned so much from having to move and leave gardens and leave communities and leave friends. And I've learned from losing our dog. Oh, I've learned so much about grief and compassion. And so this idea of impermanence is it's another really important principle that keeps me on the spiritual path. And then the last one is that this idea of agency, that if my life is reciprocal, if it's not just me in a vacuum living out my life and, you know, no one's looking, no one cares. I think ultimately, like to me, like what do the plants think of my life? What does God think? What does spirit think of the way that I'm choosing to use my life? And so for me, my one of my daily spiritual practices is this mantra that came to me I think it was about a year and a half ago, which was tend the living things first. And I live by this. Every day I think this thought that when I feel overwhelmed or I'm not sure what to do first, I think about tend the living things. So first I start with myself. Hey, Ashley, do you need water? Have you gone to the bathroom? Like, do you need food? Like, how are you? Do you need to lay down? So I'll just check in with my own living being because if I'm not reflective enough to take care of myself, it's going to be really hard for me to tend to others. So then I go to the next level, which is like my husband and my children, my family. Okay, do they need any tending? And then to the dog, then to my plants, then to the garden, then to the land. And then from the land to the community. And that's my herbal community near and far, like all herbalists. I'm constantly looking out, like, how are all my herbal people doing? And, there's a fundraiser, like a GoFundMe because of a surgery. I'm like, okay, let me support you. That's another thing that I think is really important is tithing and giving your money away. Like, I know money is impermanent and I'm not in this for the money. Like, I like nice things. I'm a double Taurus. Like, I like pretty things and I like taking care of myself, but I'm not deluded to think that it's permanent, that I deserve it, or that it couldn't disappear at any moment. Like, I know that. But I also know that money is energy and that if I am giving it out, it's just the way it works. There's a reciprocal energy about it. So for me, it's important, both my husband and I, that we donate, that we give money, we find people that are struggling or that are doing great work, and that we support them, that we're giving of our resources back into the community energetic flow. And that's been really, I love that. It feels like the right thing. And Yeah, so I think what I was, getting I diverted a little bit. So the idea of tend the living things first is that if I'm taking care of what is living, alive, and vital, and I keep those things in the forefront, then all the less spiritual or the more mundane things will naturally get taken care of. Like when I'm feeling good and happy, I'll do the bills, right? Like it's not a big deal to write a few checks and to get online and pay some bills or to clean, I'll put on a podcast and I'll clean the kitchen. But when I'm in like a down space or when I'm not taking care of myself or my kids are not well because I have neglected them and their needs aren't being met, it's harder for me to take care of bills. It's harder for me to take care of cleaning. It's harder for me to remember to pick up whatever it is, pick up the uh, clothes from the laundromat. There's a lot of things that get easier when we tend the living things first. So to me, that's been so helpful, and maybe that will be helpful for you. So just know that you have agency. And, for me, living in a reciprocal relationship with this higher spirit, like I really know that in every choice I make, even if I mess up, the next choice can be better. And that I trust that there is more good and more things of support in this world, and there is more benevolence than there is evil. So, with that, I will close. I would love to hear your thoughts. Anything about your own spiritual path that you'd like to share? What resonated with you? Are there things that I didn't mention that for you are a really important part of your spiritual path? I guess one thing that I'm just now realizing I didn't say is like um, respect of the environment. And like for me, a big part of my spiritual work is like composting and, just really taking care of the land and trying to live my life in a way that reduces global warming, that reduces trash in the landfill and water bottles, right? So like for me, living a life that has the environment um in the forefront, like that's part of what's living for me. And that for me as an herbalist is so important, is what am I doing to contribute to a cleaner and um, a cleaner earth that is more able to self regenerate herself. So okay, that's all. Let me know what you think. Like this button. You could like the button, or you could click the like button if you found this video to be helpful. So thank you so much, and I'll see y'all again soon.